Hi, I'm Leo Dressel, and today I'm gonna be talking about my new album, Borders.
Here we go.
Not a lot of love, but it could scale with time. I'm sure you get it too, get it too. Not a lot of love, but it could scale with time. I'm sure you get it too, get it.
Borders is about my life in the last 3 years and lessons that I learned. A couple of challenges that I faced in the last 3 years. I moved to Toronto, I got married, I graduated from college. Borders is basically about all of those things combined. Each one of those things is already a challenge in itself, but if you do all of them at once, and I moved to Toronto from another country, so even more complex. So Borders is about all of that and going through those things and all of the sacrifices that I had to make, me and my wife had to make. And depression and anxiety, we regret not doing things when we should have done, so you probably have that feeling sometimes like, I should have done this 2 years ago, 3 years ago. I'll be way happier now. Or I would be happy as I am now 3 years ago. So that's basically depression and also anxiety for the future. What will happen? Will this work? Will this not work? Do I have another option? Or yeah, Borders is basically about all of those
But
things.
this is what we have.
The title of the album has a triple meaning. Borders refers to the border between order and chaos. In Taoist perspective, it's like a yin-yang thing. We can't really just have order in life because we stagnate, we cease to learn new things and new experiences, and the world keeps changing and we don't adapt. And also the chaos or unknown, which is frightening but also promising, right? Everything that you know now, you learned by venturing into the unknown. I remember when I learned guitar, my dad had a guitar laying around, he never played. I was like 7 years old and I just started playing. I didn't know how it worked, so it was painful because you don't know, you're curious and you try to execute, but then it's difficult and you make mistakes, so it's like, oh my god, how to do this? But also it's promising because it sparks curiosity but also fear. So that's the unknown, right? Everything that we learn from a point of view of not knowing that thing beforehand. So it's unpredictable and we have to make that judgment. So basically it's the border between those two. We have to live between them, be balanced between having enough order and enough new things. That's the first meaning. The second meaning refers to borders between territories, but that's not from a geopolitical standpoint. It's from my own process of moving here, moving to Toronto. So moving between cities, between countries, between continents or whatever. New world, so to speak. And the third one is borderline personality. So through the album, there's all these fluctuations in behavior and mood and self-awareness and all of that. So those are basically the three components of the title, the triple meaning.
Things now I know, and now I know.
I produced the album. There are 16 songs in it, and I produced all of them. Like I said, I started writing it in 2017. Most of the production and writing took place last year, 2018. So after producing a couple of EPs and a couple of singles as well, my first EP I recorded at a friend's studio. And then the second EP I recorded at a better, more professional studio. But the production was basically the same. I wrote the songs on the acoustic guitar, and then I just booked the studio and got there and found the musicians to play stuff that I couldn't play. And I wasn't really achieving what I wanted to achieve, because if you produce that way all the time, if you ever want to produce a song that's complex with many elements, you need a lot of time to come up with ideas and execute them, then also mixing and mastering and all of that. So after producing a couple of EPs and I didn't really achieve what I wanted. I wanted more elements, more complexity, not just for the sake of complexity. It's just I wanted to express using more colors. I figured that, well, I won't be able to save enough money to book a studio for a month like you see the major artists doing, or even more than that, like 2 months in the studio just recording and writing every day. I wouldn't be able to do that by myself financially. So eventually I decided to purchase some studio gear. I went out and bought a Focusrite 2i2 interface. I bought a condenser microphone, then started learning Pro Tools first, which is the free version of Pro Tools. Eventually I got Pro Tools 12 and I started writing basically every day, recording every day and coming up with ideas and executing them. So for a couple of years I wrote and produced every day. I was finally able to compose compose and write using the number of elements that I wanted. So there's a lot of gear that I use in this album. Like I mentioned, I use Pro Tools 12, some Waves plugins, some Soundtoys stuff, the Decapitator, Contact from Native Instruments, also Reactor for pianos and basses and synthesizers and other stuff. Also Splice is super useful for musicians, it's a game changer. Production-wise and mixing and mastering all of that, I also had a lot of help from my friend Matty Owl, electronic music producer. I'm gonna leave a link to his stuff here as well.
As much as I would like to say.
So outside of digital stuff like plugins and all of that, and Splice, I use my Fender Stratocaster guitar. I've owned it since 2012. I love this guitar so much. It's a hybrid. It's not one model. It's actually the body. I don't remember which model it is. I bought the neck from Stratosphere, who's a eBay, Fender and other brands is a parts seller. It's a store that sells pickups and necks and bodies and electrical stuff and all of that. So I bought this neck from that store. It's a 95-62 reissue. Very comfortable to play with. I've refretted it, but that's basically stock. Also, so yeah, the body is from 2007. I don't remember the name now, but it's a two-tone Sunburst. It was very difficult to find because I wanted a Sunburst Strat, but they're usually three-tone. So they have the black and then the red and then the wood yellow. But I wanted because I read a lot and I'm a fan of John Frusciante's, and he has probably has many, but one of his Fender Strats is a original 60s, so pre-CBS Fender. And I read that the red color usually fades with time, and that's why you see older Sunburst Fenders being two-tone, but originally they were three-tone. So I wanted to kind of imitate that, but not having the $30,000 to buy a pre-CBS Fender. For this album, I used basically two pickup sets. The original one that I had in this guitar was the Fender 5762 set, which I love, but I started having some problems. It's probably not the pickup's fault, but I started having some problems with hum and noise, so I changed to Fender Noiseless. I prefer the 5762. They're more articulate, that's the word. The Noiseless are good as well, and everything else is Fender, stock Fender. So I used this guitar, and I used a couple of amps. So I used a Fender 4x10 DeVille. That Fender amp has 3 preamp tubes, V1, V2, and V3. And I think the stock ones are 12 AX7s. And I remember once I saw a John Mayer Instagram picture of a Milkman amp that he bought. He changed the original tube to a 5751 NOS. So I looked it up and I started reading more about tubes and all of that. And eventually I bought the 5751 and I experimented with other tubes as well, such as 12AT7 from different brands like JJ, GE, Westinghouse. I remember that was a game changer as well. Changed the tone of the amp completely. Fun fact, those tubes that I bought, I remember first paid gig as a singer that I had. I went home after the gig with my now wife. We had just started dating at the time. I remember we were, in my house drinking some wine and just talking, but on the computer, talking and Googling stuff, kind of like a Joe Rogan Experience vibe. I was showing her, because at the time I was just getting into vintage tubes and all of that, and I was showing her some obscure European used or NOS tubes, also explaining to her what NOS stand for, which is New Old Stock. And I remember just blowing the whole gig money on tubes that night, and I'm sure she was super impressed with vintage tube stock, and I was just nerding out on gear. But anyway, I also used a small orange amp. I don't remember the model now. Pedals, I used full tone OCD, which is a drive. I used the version 3 at 18 volts, and that makes a huge difference. So if you have one, probably using it at 9 volts, but if you use it at 18 volts, of course, most power supplies don't offer that option. I remember I used a Fuel Tank Junior that has that option. So if I were you, I would try that, because it really makes a difference. I also use a TC Electronic Flashback X4. I love the space setting for delays and loops. I recorded a lot of loops using that pedal. Came up with, different loops and stuff. For songs like Purple Space, for example. That song was definitely born using the space setting and it was a loop that I recorded on Flashback X4. Also, I used a compressor, a cheap Chinese compressor, I think is Joyo. Yeah, it served the purpose and fit the budget. So that's basically it for guitar. Then I also use my complete keyboard from Native. That guitar setup is basically the same guitar setup that I used for years. So if you listen to my EP Relax Leo or my single Future Love from 2016, that's basically the same setup. The old pickup, the same pedals. For strings, if you're a guitar player and interested in that, I used to play with 13 gauge and now I'm playing with 11s, usually Ernie Ball, Ultex picks. So that was the gear that I used.
Sorry I called you crazy. Call me crazy now.
There are many artists that inspire me. So I kind of separated into 3 sections, right? First section is for having the confidence in myself and going ahead and producing it by myself. I think of people like Kaytranada, Tom Misch, Jordan Rakai, and his drummer are incredible mixing and sound they were able to get. And at first, all of the albums that they recorded, basically the Cloak was, I remember I just listened to that album for months. Tom Misch is just ridiculous as well. The tone is just incredible. Kevin Parker from Tame Impala, I was really inspired when I read that he produced Currents by himself. You know, Kanye, Soundwave, and Derek Ali, the work they do with TDE, but basically I was more focused on Kendrick. Those guys gave me the confidence that, well, if I put in the work, if I'm disciplined, I probably can learn how to do this by myself. And that was basically the inspiration for going ahead and instead of going to studios or hiring a producer, I try to do everything by myself. Made a lot of mistakes. Probably in the future I'll look back and say, wow, I would have done things differently in Borders. That's the learning process. For message, I really can relate to Logic. Very positive, but also critical of some nonsense that we have in society nowadays. Kendrick, To Pimp a Butterfly is probably one of my top 5 favorite albums of all time. It's a completely different world from mine, but just the sound and the way he conveyed the message, basically all of Kendrick's albums actually, from Section 80 on to Good Kid, Mad City. I'm heavily influenced by this, the album is conceptual, it's like a movie. I was very impressed by that, and that's basically the reason why Borders is like that too. Like, well, these songs kind of gel together and they kind of fit the same narrative, so we probably should invest some time and just build it. J. Cole is like that too. Forest Hills Drive is also one of my favorite records. KOD also. For message and content is really, I'm really impressed by the way Cole and Kendrick, Logic, the way they explore subjects. Work ethic as well, right? If you just think about how many albums and mixtapes and all of that Logic has put out. He's a young dude. Also Wiz Khalifa. I remember Taylor Alderdice, one of his mixtapes, also has the interviews as skits. So I always like that conceptual vibe where songs are knit together by the transitions. So that's basically why in Borders I have the narrator with the messages, and I have the TTC, Toronto's public transportation system. Those announcements, they knit the songs together in a narrative form because they express the path that me and my wife had when exploring Toronto. For the third section is just overall inspiration. Bands like Bring Me the Horizon, Lamb of God, and Meshuggah, which you're probably thinking, if you know those bands, has nothing to do with your music, Leo. And I agree, but I'm just saying what inspires me. Also, Antonio Carlos Jobim, probably everyone knows The Girl of Ipanema. He's a Brazilian composer, so a lot of classical arrangements that he had that Klaus Ogerman did for him in the album Terra Brasilis. I really recommend listening to at least 2 songs in that album. Wave, that version of Wave, and Double Rainbow. Just the arrangements, classical arrangements, I'm very into that. I grew up listening to bands like like Limp Bizkit and Linkin Park, so that mixture between hooks and verses, that's very natural for me, that progression, like a kind of rap hip-hop verse but with a very big hook. Max Martin structure but mixed with Linkin Park, if you will. Sounds weird, but yeah. And also Jacob Collier, huge inspiration for going for more complex things and studying music theory. In that section I would also add Jordan Rakei and Tom Misch for that matter. And as a guitar player, it was always Steve Vai, Joe Satriani, and then I transitioned into a more songwriter style like John Mayer and Richie Kotzen. Those were my favorite guitar players growing up. So I believe all those sources of inspiration, they contribute in some way or another to what my music is today, to what Borders is today. You have beats, guitar solos, but hooks and verses that are more hip-hop style and R&B and jazz elements as well. We just absorb everything that's around, and certain things really resonate with what we have inside, and then we organize everything that we hear in an original way, hopefully. Certain things, they come at you in a very compelling way, and then you oh my god, and then you eventually use that in your own work. I want to reach that point in time again and again and again and again, when the sensations that I felt when I heard that for the first time. That's what happens to me. If you haven't heard it yet, or if you already have been listening to the songs and kind of familiar with the concept already, just going through the songs a little bit. So Visa is not from the credit card, it's from passports and travel documents and immigration and all of that. So it's the opening of the album because that's the thing, moving to Toronto, venturing into, you know, a new territory. And then after that you have Ups and Downs. Almost like a bipolar situation where you have ups in your self-esteem and you're very like, wow, I really like what I'm doing and I think I can go somewhere with this, and then downs where you feel everything you touch is horrible, and there are all those memes on Instagram for music producers that nothing works and everything you do it's horrible. Then you reach another up moment where you come up with a song and then you send to your friend and then he says, wow, it's a promising idea, it's gonna sound great after it's mixed. You had already mixed it, and so you have all these ups and downs. That song talks about that. And then the third song is Lie, talking about how lying is a corrosive habit. Not only you're destroying your relationship, your trust that people have in you, but also lying to yourself and all that. Then you have Purple Space, which is about the beginning of my relationship with my wife, not wanting to commit, but wanting to, that weird moment in time. Then Go, which is another reminder of go ahead, do stuff. Don't just stay where you are. It's kind of a transition into the next song, which is Down and Up, which is a hopeful song. It's talking about me and my wife saving money to move to Toronto and all the hardship and sacrifices that we make and all of that. And also a lot of self-doubt and anxiety and depression. After that comes Broke, which I mentioned before. Not having money, not having numbers are low, just looking at analytics and how many views in that video, how many likes in that photo and all of that, and everything at once, right? Just the challenges, and then you don't see the results. I remember there's a J. Cole line where he says that he's telling a guy that, well, you're too blind, you're too ungrateful, you can't see that you have fans already. And I was kind of in that situation. Be grateful for what you have and not just thinking about what you don't have, because that's a bottomless pit of sorrow, right? After Broke comes As Long As You're Here. That song is actually from the point of view of my wife. So my wife is a very protective and very obsessive, and so it's from her point of view in our relationship. After that is Free Association Vacation. It's a transition song. It's really about free associating when you have words that have a double meaning, and then you keep going and then you're developing these ideas. And that's why at the end of the song there's Antonio Carlos Jobim. He says that in Portuguese, but it's a wordplay between grocery and deli, because in Portuguese grocery sounds like the same word for root, and deli sounds like the same word for delicate, sophisticated, right? And then he says that the delicatessen has been substituted by the grocery. So it's kind of a free association that he loved to do, and I also like to do that. That song transitions the previous song into Call Me Crazy, which is a song about mental health and judgment, not being so quick to judge other people. That's why I said you call me crazy, because it's so easy to call someone crazy if they do something stupid, or from your point of view, it seems stupid. Like every everyone is going through stuff that you have no idea about. So you have zero insight into whatever is going on in anyone's private life. It was kind of a reminder to myself not to be so quick in judging other people. After Call Me Crazy, there's Lest I Win. In Down and Up, in the chorus, I say, down and up, lest I win. So finally I win. Finally I get what I want. Finally I'm happy. And Lest I Win, I just changed one letter and it changed the meaning completely. So after Call Me Crazy, lest I win. So depression, anxiety, all these, demons, they will prevent myself from winning, from achieving what I want, from all of that. So the song has two parts. The first is more classical sound, and then into this jazzy soul beat with this crazy guitar solo with Steve Vai-ish harmony and all of that. That's the preparation for the next song, which is Spiral, which is about panic attacks and anxiety and just lying to yourself or omitting, and then eventually that culminates in panic attack and losing sleep, and all of that is a horrible feeling if you lie to yourself, like Richard Feynman said. You should avoid fooling yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool, and that's true, right? Sometimes we tell stories to ourselves and excuses or some just flat out lies in order to feel better or not feel guilty. That's not the end of it. That dragon gets larger and larger and eventually it eats you. So after Spiral, I go back to focusing on what really matters, which is family, which is basically the only thing you can really count on. And to me, it's talking about me and my wife, how we love each other, and it's more a feel-good and hedonistic perspective. But then after that comes Now I Know, which we have these moments in life, if you pay attention, where things almost go horribly wrong. You make a mistake, and then the things that you really wanted, you make a mistake and you almost destroy all of that. That song is about that. So that's why Now I Know is the title, and 423 is the date. A specific event that I was focusing on happened. And then continuing the same motif, realizing what really matters and not getting caught up on numbers and things that we think are super important, but in reality they are secondary to family, and being happy with who you are, being honest. So Once You Realize is the second to last song and really takes the album to a conclusion, which is really, once you realize you got it already, you have everything you need, it's all good. Just keep going, right? Just problems will arise, and then eventually the album concludes on a more positive note, which is more, more, more. That's why the message of the album is like, things keep breaking. Things in the house, they break all the time and things go wrong. So you never achieve that moment where everything is perfect, everything is working. That's basically the theme of the album. That's basically the lesson that I learned doing what I did. All the challenges and moving here and sacrifices and saying no to 1,000 things in order to say yes to just a handful of super important things and paying the price for it. So that's basically what I learned through the whole process. Like, the process is what's more important. So easy to say, right? Much easier said than done, but that's basically what I tried to convey in the album. There are certain Easter eggs, if you will. There's this discussion going on philosophically, not in the album itself, in the world right now, where is there free will? Is there a self that is experiencing things? That's always the question. Some people say that there is free will. Some people say that free will doesn't exist, like Sam Harris. In Down and Up, there's a reference to that where it says, Sam says there's no self, but I'm suffering a lot right now, so how come no such thing as a self exists? And also references to Jordan Peterson says sometimes about cleaning your room, just organize what you have in your life before you try to change everything else. So that's why that female voice that narrates the story of the album, in the last song she says, make sure you clean your room of what's not necessary. Don't be a hoarder, right? Don't block the windows, because if you keep everything inside, if you keep accumulating guilt and self-righteousness and all these negative things, you have to keep those things somewhere. As an analogy to a physical storage. They eventually take up all of the space in your house and you block the windows, right? And the windows are holes through which light comes in. And light is, understanding new things, new ideas, and redemption, if you will. That was basically the idea. Very inspired by those two guys, Sam Harris, Jordan Peterson. Also people like Tim Ferriss, Joe Rogan. Those concepts also influenced the album. It's not only musicians, it's also thinkers and comedians. I wanted to have a Chris Rock quote in the album, but I was afraid of copyright infringement, and I never really figured out how to do that. But Chris Rock, Chappelle, Kevin Hart, all of those guys, there are many different influences for this concept. So I really hope you like the album. It would mean a lot to me if you followed me on Spotify or Instagram. It will be good for both of us if you like my work. Also subscribe here to this YouTube channel. Leave your comment, what you think of the album, suggestions, everything. I love to hear more what you think about it. So those are the best ways for me to keep you posted of what I'm doing and what I will be doing in the future. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll drop all the links below in the description, and I'll see you next time.
Yes, it's possibly too good, possibly too good. All I have, it's time to go check on, time to go check on. Oh yeah, no something to me, no something to me, no something to me, no something to me.